So welcome back to Understanding Unpopular Opinions. Now you've probably seen this statement before, that for whatever reason, seinen manga is infinitely better than shonen manga. You've probably seen it reiterated and echoed on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube comment sections, YouTube videos even. Pretty much it's something that pops up every now and then that people take a little bit too seriously. Personally, as someone that indulges more so within the seinen side of things, I've also been curious about this distinction, why people prefer seinen manga over shonen, or potentially even vice versa. And the most biggest and obvious idea that pops directly into mind is that seinen series are more mature, thus for whatever reason they are suddenly better, that they are extremely well handled and that they have no boundaries so they can do whatever they want, meaning that they can potentially do no wrong. Now admittedly that is the most extreme of cases, and I highly doubt there's a large percentage of people that think exactly that, but I do think some of those sentiments are watered down and at least traverse over to that idea, which creates this conversation. Is seinen manga better than shonen, or vice versa? Obviously everyone has their own personal tastes, their own likes, their own wants, their own things that they're seeking, but we are going to unravel and talk about some of those elements. So with that, let's begin. Over the past couple of days, I've been seeing this quite often, and it does pop up pretty regularly on Twitter to obviously spark some sort of engagement, some sort of clicks, right? But the idea that seinen is better than shonen inherently just because it has mature themes is really odd to me. And for me personally, there's a lot of backbone that goes into it. I wouldn't say that I necessarily see it as black and white as that, but I do think there is healthy arguments to be had on either side, and it kind of completely depends on where your story is published. Kind of the understanding of what seinen and shonen actually means towards the manga industry, because 100% over the years the words have been watered down quite drastically. They no longer have the same value as their original meaning and have been somewhat contorted into a different meaning, almost genre defining. So nowadays you'll find people talking about a series and calling it shonen-like or seinen-esque or this or that, and it's helped to kind of bracket a series into a specific type of story mold. This is inherently wrong from a technical perspective. These are not what the words actually mean or what they contribute to, and it's definitely semantics, but when you start to boil things down to just being seinen or shonen, you lose a lot of that finesse. You lose a lot of that identity, the individuality that each of these series has. So what is a seinen manga and what is a shonen manga, and why is this here to begin with? This would start with Weekly Shonen Jump. It is the most prominent magazine in the world. It is the most successful, it has garnered the most fame, and it has created the most iconic series of all time, a plethora of them. Weekly Shonen Jump is quite literally that. It's a weekly magazine, one chapter every single week, and the shonen is an age bracket, meaning that they would create stories for this very specific age bracket. You're looking at anywhere between the ages of 16 and under. And with this, you create a kind of pseudo formula. With Weekly Shonen Jump being a successful magazine, they would obviously want to replicate that success over and over again and creating a theoretical formula of success. This has been happening for many years. I'm not talking 3 to 5, I'm talking 15 to 20. Stuff that predates the early 2000s. Considering stories like Naruto and One Piece and Yu Yu Hakusho were released in the 90s. So with all of this attention coming to these series and manga evolving and growing over time, these are your big hitters. Thus, these formulas or groundwork would be created to try and replicate these big hitters. And thus, the Weekly Shonen Jump formula would start to spawn itself, and other series would start to replicate it and to try and mimic that fame, that success. Because of all of that hard work and effort, this is where the shonen name lies today. That if you call something a shonen-like story, you think of these series, you think of these classics, these icons. Somewhere it is residing within that shonen formula. Seinen, on the other hand, is something a little bit different. It does not have the same legacy or history as Weekly Shonen Jump, with how the name actually comes into existence, or how the community, I should say, has utilized or weaponized the word itself. Instead, it's somewhat spawned as an opposite to Shonen Jump, with people reading more mature stories or more darker stories, stuff that you would never find within Weekly Shonen Jump. It would be labeled labeled as just being seinen. So it didn't directly come from one specific magazine, but more so just a plethora of mature stories. Stuff like Monster, Berserk, Vagabond, etc. This is an endless supply of things, and obviously the seinen age bracket is 18 and over. Funny enough, there also is a weekly seinen magazine that is quite literally the equivalent of Weekly Shonen Jump, but just seinen, just for a mature audience, and one of the most successful series of all time is published within there, which is known as Kingdom. It has been going non-stop for the past 15, 16, 17 odd years, and is one of, if not the most successful seinen series that is a weekly. The only other series to ever compete with Kingdom, from my knowledge, on such a high level with worldwide attention is Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re. And I would say that this really put the weekly quote-unquote seinen experience on the map. This is where the conversations or arguments or discussions started to come in for shonen versus seinen. But why? Why even have this type of argument or discussion to begin with? And it all kind of comes down to the stories that they're telling. Mature themes versus potentially not so mature themes, which isn't even a thing to begin with. That's not really a factual statement. It's more so just that perception. You see a seinen and supposedly it's instantly more mature. You see a shonen and it's more child-friendly, it's more kid-like. This is quite literally judging a book by its cover. This perception is very warped and doesn't always translate one-to-one, because there is an infinite amount of seinen series or quote-unquote mature stories that are the complete opposite of that perception. A story can simply be seinen just for diving into one mature aspect a little bit too much. This involves sexual references, gore, very visual artwork that depicts these things in a very gruesome way, mental health, abuse, trauma, obsession, pretty much anything that has some sort of severity behind it. The more detail that goes into showing that severity is where that mature theme actually gets created, thus getting it that 18+ market, thus quote-unquote being a seinen magazine. This instantly doesn't make it better than shonen, and there's quite an opposite argument I would like to make for shonen series. As much as they can be formulaic, as much as they can rinse and repeat different ideas to try and figure out what is successful and what's going to work, they have a guideline, they have a buffer, they have this comfort and support system that, one, not only people are used to, but two, authors will most likely find it very intriguing and comfortable to sit within this weekly Shonen Jump formula. A seinen series don't have this appeal. You will get anything and everything. And while this creatively sounds really interesting and really enjoyable, I would say that you have more of a chance to completely ruin or just not have a very attentive story that is addicting or alluring because of it, because of how much freedom is actually being produced. There's no guidelines, there's no rails, there's no support system that the author is used to or that even the readers are used to. So you just have to hope that the premise, that the hook, that the characters, that your story through and through is enjoyable, is enticing, is interesting. On top of it, seinen series have this very difficult time on creating their own boundaries. I have read a plethora, a litany of quote-unquote mature seinen manga, and a lot of the time they push things way too far. Now this might sound like a good thing, but I've noticed over the years just indulging within different series is that if you don't have a set boundary for yourself with what you can showcase and how you showcase things, you start to lose control. The story starts to become very fickle and over-exaggerated, and something as simple as pacing can ruin a very serious conversation, a very serious topic, a very serious showcase of events or emotions, this, that, the third. I would say that this is one of the most difficult things that seinen series or mature stories have to actually focus on and come to that realization. Being respectful, having an understanding. If you're writing a story that focuses heavily around depression or mental health or trauma, you have to be very careful. You have to set boundaries of how much you can showcase and how much you want to showcase while bringing that message across. If you do not set your boundaries, I've noticed two things will happen. One, your story will feel fake. It will feel fickle. It will feel very disrespectful to these very serious and real emotions and feelings and concepts that people go through on a day-to-day basis. And two, you can easily over-exaggerate things that aren't there to begin with. I have personally read it and seen it the most in series that focus very heavily and deeply on mental health. They will over-dramatize the situation. They will over-dramatize prioritize emotions and how people react. And unfortunately, this is one of the worst things you can do. There is an endless supply of nuance within mental health, and portraying that in the realest and rawest types of ways is the most effective. It is probably one of the most difficult things to do, and it's probably the reason why Ino Asano is considered a genius, a prodigy within Japan, because of all of his works, but more notably Oyasumi Punpun, that focuses directly on that. A very real and authentic portrayal of mental health. Do you see how with seinen or mature stories, freedom doesn't mean everything? If you don't know how to control that freedom, you don't know how to control that creativity, you don't set your own boundaries for your own mature themes, you will make your story feel fickle. You will over-exaggerate it. You will break it apart very quickly, and a lot of seinen stories have this issue. There's just too much of it there. Weekly Shonen Jump, on the other hand, has a formula. It has a boundary surrounding it on what you can and can't do, and while it can be very limited for authors, I would assume it does provide some sort of pseudo comfort for them. They know the limit what they're able to show, so you have all of this room to play around within. Overall, the drawback is that a lot of stories may feel eerily similar to one another, that they are trying to replicate and be a fresh coat of paint for a recent series that was really popular. Or maybe that popular series birthed a new concept or a new power system or an element or an idea that a lot of people really loved, and now other series, newer series, want to capitalize on top of that. Now, don't get me wrong, there is an endless supply of both seinen and shonen manga that is impeccable. The best of the best that you can imagine. When you think of some of the best mature stories to exist, you may think of Berserk, or Vagabond, or Oyasumi Punpun, Monster, Pluto, 20th Century Boys, Tokyo Ghoul even, Kingdom. You can have this exact same thing for shonen. One Piece, Bleach, Naruto, Yu Yu Hakusho, Hunter x Hunter, Jujutsu Kaisen, Chainsaw Man, Demon Slayer, Black Clover, etc, etc. The list goes on. I would argue that both seinen manga and shonen manga have their strengths and weaknesses. They're very different from one another, and they provide different experiences. Just going from a weekly seinen series to a monthly seinen series is inherently different. Same thing can be said for weekly shonen and monthly shonen. I think the funniest thing that contradicts kind of seinen and shonen inherently is the fact that because these things are only age brackets, you can find magazines that are both. So while the magazine might literally have shonen in the title, its age bracket is over 18, meaning it's a shonen story with mature themes, meaning that it is both a seinen and a shonen by definition, by age bracket, which is what powers those words. But rarely you will see people recognize this, or at least they might not want to admit it. And the funniest and best example I can give you is Attack on Titan, quote-unquote shonen series, and people like to throw it around as a shonen series, one of the best shonen series, because all of the mature themes that it has within its story. But the reality of the magazine that it's published in is that yes, it has shonen in the title, but its age bracket also covers seinen. It is a magazine that covers 16 to 21, so it is quite literally both. But for the potential agenda or conversation or discussion purpose, a lot of people like to throw it in as being a shonen, showing how far shonen can go with these things, which isn't the case at all. If you took every concept that Attack on Titan has and tried to put it within Weekly Shonen Jump, which is where the name actually comes from, which is the reason why it has the power and why people use it the way they do, I doubt you would ever see it, at least showcased in that detail that Attack on Titan done it. We're talking about a very detailed showcase of genocide, of racism, of segregation, of stuff that has to be given life and purpose and a lot of intent behind it, so you as a reader can understand where the author is coming from. Weekly Shonen Jump stories can do that, but they will water it down very heavily, and that is because it is a business at the end of the day. They have a bracket that they have to publish to, and they don't want to have mature themes within their stories that are overly dived into. Only a little bit, only enough, only within that boundary that they set. So what is the point of this? Is seinen better? Is shonen better? To be honest, I could care less. The name seinen and shonen honestly mean nothing for me, and I've utilized it within this video as a way to make it easier to understand certain series. They're not genres, they're quite literally age brackets. And I understand the community has given a different meaning, a different power to those words, which will continue to be used, which is completely fine. That's up to your own interpretation and usage of it. But for myself, it completely boils down to personal opinion. You're not in the wrong for liking shonen stories over seinen. Maybe you like that comfortable nature. Maybe you like that formula that it has. You're not wrong for liking seinen stories over shonen. Maybe you like that freedom, that intensity, those mature themes and how they're portrayed. I would say it comes completely down to your personal taste. As writing wise, seinen stories and shonen stories have their own pros and cons. They have their strengths and weaknesses, and I've experienced all different versions of them across the entirety of the board. They offer different things. They offer different components and different deep dives into those components, which either one don't really tend to fall into. Seinen may do something like this, but shonen will do it in a completely different way, which has its own uniqueness to it, and vice versa. It almost seems odd or silly to compare them, to line them up side by side, but I do realize that people will feel more comfortable in either category, because at the end of the day, for a business module and perspective, that is all they are. Endtime. So welcome to the end of the video. If you have made it this far, I appreciate you. Thank you. I would like to know, out of all of the defining traits of seinen or shonen, what do you prefer? Do you lean towards more mature stories, more freedom, more creativity potentially? Or maybe you enjoy the comfort that weekly shonen series provide, the boundaries that they can stick within and how they utilize that creativity to create something new. At the end of the day, it comes down to your own personal opinion, what type of story you're looking for, what you value, where you want to put your time. You can love both and you can love neither, and that's kind of the beauty of it. Regardless, there's going to be a story for everyone in either department. You just got to look around a bit. You just got to find something that piques your interest. Let me know in the comment section below. But with that, I want to thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.